On board, USS Helena. American radar operators exchange worried glances as contacts appear at 27,700 yards. Could it be the Japanese fleet bearing down on Guadalcanal? The range drops to 20,000 yards, then 15,000. Helena warns her flagship USS San Francisco, but San Francisco's radar shows nothing amiss. The distance closes to 10,000 yards, within torpedo range, then 5,000 yards. Close enough to see enemy holes through the darkness. Still, there's no permission to engage. Helena's radar officer asks incredulously, "What are we going to do? Board them?" Little did anyone know that Admiral Scott was about to pull off one of the most perfect and deadliest maneuvers in naval strategy by accident, with a shocking outcome that is still debated today. By early October 1942, the battle for Guadalcanal had become a grinding contest of attrition. The Allies had seized Henderson Field 2 months earlier, giving American aircraft control of the daytime skies. But at night, the Imperial Japanese Navy held the advantage. Fast cruisers and destroyers moved through the narrow corridor known as the slot, running supplies to Japanese ground forces in near-nightly missions the Allies called the Tokyo Express. To the Japanese was a lifeline. The pattern settled into a rhythm. Japanese warships delivered men and material by night, but at a cost. Vital destroyers were diverted from escort duties and had serious limits on cargo capacity. Both sides escalated their efforts. The Japanese concentrated forces at Rabaul, preparing a decisive push to retake Henderson Field, while the Allies rushed reinforcements to protect their foothold. Task Force 64 was formed under Rear Admiral Norman Scott to protect Allied convoys and strike back against the Tokyo Express. Scott was a career battleship officer who had spent decades studying surface tactics. He had a reputation as a serious, disciplined commander. Trim and ramrod straight, he always appeared crisply uniformed, projecting the image of a textbook naval officer. The stakes were clear. Since August, the Allies had suffered repeated losses in close battles, including the devastating defeat at Savo Island, without sinking a single Japanese vessel in return. Scott's strategy hinged on using radar to strike first fast and hard before the Japanese could react. Success depended on tight coordination and speed in the chaos of night combat. As Scott's ships moved into position south of Guadalcanal, Japanese forces launched another major run. Vice Admiral Yojima led the main reinforcement group to seaplane tenders and 6 destroyers loaded with troops, howitzers, field guns, and anti-aircraft weapons. His objective was to land vital reinforcements on Guadalcanal under cover of darkness, to clear the way. Rear Admiral Guto advanced with a bombardment group of 3 heavy cruisers, Furutaka and Kanuga-san, 2 destroyers, Fubuki and Hatsuyuki. Their task was to strike Henderson Field and draw American attention away from Jojima's landing force. Admiral Arutotomo Guto was a stern, disciplined officer known for aggressive tactics, confidence, and a belief in the Imperial Navy's doctrine of swift, decisive strikes. Physically imposing and stern-faced, Guto carried himself with the rigid bearing expected of a Japanese flag officer. The Japanese expected no resistance. Until now, no Allied surface force had challenged the Tokyo Express at night. On October 11, 1942, at 8 a.m., Vice Admiral Jojima's reinforcement group departed from the Shortland Islands. The seaplane tenders carried crucial supplies, while 6 destroyers formed a protective screen. The newest destroyer, Akazuki, featured advanced dual-purpose 100mm guns and sophisticated fire control systems. 6 hours later, around 2 p.m., Rear Admiral Guto's bombardment group followed. The 3 heavy cruisers, each armed with 10 8-inch guns capable of hurling 250-pound shells over 17 miles, would pound Henderson Field while Jojima's forces delivered reinforcements. After weeks of successful night operations, both Japanese commanders had grown overconfident. They believed American radar was still primitive and unreliable, never suspecting that several U.S. cruisers now carried advanced SG radar sets, tracking them in real time. That afternoon, the Japanese launched air support missions. A sweep of 17 Mitsubishi Zeros crossed Henderson Field, drawing no response. Later, 45 Betty bombers escorted by 30 Zeros attacked, triggering a furious dogfight. 1 Betty crashed in flames while 2 American fighters were torn apart mid-air. Henderson Field remained operational throughout the afternoon. Zeros continued protective missions. The final group maintained cover until sunset, then ditched at sea as planned, awaiting destroyer rescue. All 6 aircraft splashed into the water, and 5 pilots were lost. At 2:45 p.m., Allied reconnaissance aircraft sighted what they believed were 2 cruisers and 6 destroyers heading down the slot. In reality, they had spotted Vice Admiral Jojima's reinforcement group to large seaplane tenders accompanied by 6 destroyers. From the air, the tenders' size and profile resembled cruisers, leading to a critical misidentification. As a result, Allied commanders assumed this was the main threat and remained unaware that Rear Admiral Guto's heavier bombardment, Group 3, actual cruisers and 2 destroyers was following behind. Scott immediately steered his task force toward Guadalcanal, although his ships carried radar and heavier firepower. They lacked battle cohesion and night fighting experience. Scott chose to command from the heavy cruiser San Francisco, the more prestigious vessel, but that decision carried a critical disadvantage. San Francisco had the older SC radar, significantly less capable than the SG sets on the light cruisers Helena and Boise. The technological difference was profound. SG radar used microwave frequencies for precise surface target resolution, providing greater range, accuracy, and performance near coastlines. The SC radar relied on longer wavelengths with broader beams, making it difficult to distinguish between ship types with precision. In practical terms, Helena and Boise could see sharp, detailed target profiles, while Scott's flagship showed only vague blob sailing, effectively blind. Scott's battle plan was straightforward but aggressive. His 5 ships would sail in a single-file column, with destroyers leading and trailing and cruisers in the middle. The forward destroyers would be the first to detect enemy ships by radar. On contact, they were to switch on searchlights, fire illumination rounds, and launch torpedoes. More importantly, the cruisers, positioned for maximum firepower, were ordered not to wait for commands. They were to open fire the moment targets were lit, aiming to break up any Japanese formation before it could react. For extra visibility, Scott ordered float planes launched ahead. These scouts would patrol around Savo Island, dropping flares over enemy ships to guide American gunners. By 10 p.m., near Cape Esperance, the launches began. Planes splashed into the sea, one after another. One stalled after takeoff and crashed off the starboard beam. The other 2 climbed into the darkness and became unseen sentinels over the battlefield. Meanwhile, Jojima's group hugged Guadalcanal's north coast, moving silently just offshore. The seaplane tenders offloaded troops and supplies while the destroyers stood watch, all without encountering resistance. Lookouts saw the American float planes but raised no alarm. Doctrine demanded stealth, and the Japanese assumed the Americans wouldn't dare strike at night. Yojima even radioed Goto with a routine report that no American surface ships had been detected. Gotsu acknowledged and pressed on in standard cruising formation, expecting a clear run to Henderson Field. His bombardment group, following close behind the transports, received no warning of what lay ahead. Earlier, Allied reconnaissance had made a crucial error. It mistook Jojima's slower seaplane tenders for heavy cruisers and completely missed Goto's group. To American eyes, it looked like a Japanese surface force preparing for battle, and that misreading shaped Scott's response as he turned task force 64 northeast to intercept. Just past Cape Esperance at 10:33 p.m., Scott's column shifted to battle formation. Destroyers Fahrenholt, Duncan, and Laffey led. Behind them came cruisers San Francisco, Boise, Salt Lake City, and Helena. Destroyers Buchanan and McCullough brought up the rear. The night was pitch black, no moon, no visibility, no horizon. The advanced radars on Helena and Boise swept the waters ahead. Searching for targets. Southwest of the American line, Goto's group emerged from a rain squall at high speed. Aoba led, followed by Furutaka and Kinugasa, with Fubuki and Hatsuki on the flanks. They sailed without radar and launched no scouts, believing they were traversing empty seas. In reality, they were steering straight into an ambush. Helena detected them first. Her SG radar showed clear contacts at 27,700 yards, and plotters marked the track as the numbers tightened with every sweep. Aboard the flagship San Francisco, the older SC radar remained blank. Still unaware of the approaching enemy, Rear Admiral Scott ordered the column to reverse course. His plan required each ship to hold its course until reaching Fahrenholt's position, then wheel around as one unit to keep the line intact. But San Francisco never waited. Her helm swung hard to port the moment the signal lamp blinked. Boise, next in line, had no choice but to follow or risk collision, and she heeled sharply left. Suddenly, the 3 lead destroyers Fahrenholt, Duncan, and Laffey were no longer ahead but sliding down the cruiser's starboard flank. Helena's Combat Information Center called the bridge. Multiple targets closing fast on a new bearing. Boise echoed the warning. Other captains reported similar plots with bearings fanning across their scopes. Scott asked for confirmation. His radar showed only friendly signatures with destroyers moving up his starboard side. He radioed Fahrenholt to check if it was resuming its forward position. The reply came, affirmative. Coming up on your starboard side. That reinforced Scott's belief that the contacts were his own ships, and convinced the reports of enemy contacts were false, so he dismissed them. On Boise, the SG radar trace grew brighter as the range collapsed yard by yard. Helena's chief radar operator counted down the closure aloud. Gun crews stood ready. Within minutes, the unknown contacts would be inside torpedo range. By then, the 2 light cruisers knew exactly what they were tracking. Goto's bombardment group, running straight toward the American column. At 11:42 p.m., Helena's bridge crew made visual contact, dark holes. No recognition lights, closing rapidly. The radar officer muttered, "What are we going to do? Board them." At the same time, lookouts aboard Ioba spotted silhouettes to the south and assumed they were friendly vessels from Jojima's group. Range fell under 5,000 yards. A perfect crossing the T position, every American cruiser could bring its broadside to bear, while each Japanese gun remained limited to a forward arc. Helena's captain sensed the opportunity slipping away and flashed San Francisco. The coded query requesting permission to open fire. Interrogatory, Roger Scott, still reorganizing his jumbled formation, replied simply, Roger. He meant only to acknowledge receipt of the transmission, not to authorize firing. On Helena, however, Scott's single Roger was interpreted as permission. At 11:46 p.m., 15 6-inch rifles spoke as one. Flame strobed Helena's length and brass casings clattered across deck plates. Goto, thinking they were taking friendly fire, hesitated and ordered signal lamps flashed to confirm identity. Aoba signaled back. I am Aoba. Seconds later, Boise joined in, her guns cycling so rapidly that lookouts mistook the roar for automatic weapons. Salt Lake City launched deliberate 8-inch salvos, one after another. Even San Francisco, now spotting muzzle flashes ahead, joined the barrage, startling Scott as much as Admiral Goto aboard Ioba. The first American salvos hammered into Ioba before anyone aboard could react. Shells from multiple ships tore into the superstructure. Explosions devastated the bridge and communication systems. Two of Aba's 3 8-inch turrets were knocked out. Several heavy rounds passed straight through the bridge without exploding. But the pressure waves alone cut down most of the crew present and critically wounded Goto. His fatal hesitation mistaking the enemy for his own head sealed his fate before the shells even struck. Shells raked across the Japanese column from port to starboard. The gunfire was so continuous that sailors on both sides described it as a single rolling thunderclap. Duncan, already separated from the formation, surged toward the flashes to launch her torpedoes, maintaining radio silence. Within moments, iron bitum sound became a lattice of tracers, starshell bursts, and water geysers. Goto's ships, caught in the glare of sudden starshells and searchlights, scrambled to unmask their own guns. But the opening advantage in initiative belonged entirely to Scott's line. Meanwhile, Scott, on San Francisco, still uncertain of his targets, worried they might be his own destroyers. 1 minute after his column began firing, he ordered a ceasefire. Confused, Fahrenholt signaled her position, revealing she was almost inside the American cruiser line. Scott finally realized the ships under fire were enemies and ordered all ships to resume firing. The damage was already severe. Aoba was crippled. Her captain deployed smoke and turned starboard, retreating into the haze. American fire shifted to Furutica, which was hit in her torpedo tubes. The resulting fire illuminated the cruiser and drew more salvos. 9 minutes later, a torpedo from Buchanan slammed into Furutaka's forward engine room. Systems failed, speed dropped, and flames engulfed her midsection. San Francisco and Boise spotted Fubuki just 1,400 yards away and tore into the destroyer with gunfire. Joined by every American ship in range, Fubuki caught broadside and, unable to escape, began to sink beneath the waves. But the battle was far from over. Fahrenholt took a hit from a Japanese airburst that shredded her radar antenna and sent a spray of metal under her torpedo mount. One shard pierced a torpedo's air flask, triggering it. The weapon blasted out of the tube, slammed into the forward funnel, and stuck there with its motor howling. By sheer luck, it was a dud. The propellant burned out and the warhead did not detonate. Moments later, more shells tore into Fahrenholt from both directions. American gunners, still unsure of their targets in the confusion, had joined in. One round punched through her port side at the waterline, cutting power and communications. Struck repeatedly at least 6 times by friendly fire. Fahrenholt turned across San Francisco's bow and drifted clear of the fight, her decks burning. Duncan, already deep into her torpedo attack, then came under fire from the Japanese and, mistakenly, from her own side, shells ripped through her bridge. Flames engulfed the forward section, and a hit to the steering gear locked the rudder hard to port. Out of control, she circled slowly as fires raged from bow to stern. The torpedo she had launched kept running toward the enemy line, but Duncan herself was finished, crippled more by American shells than by Japanese ones, with Ioba disappearing behind a smokescreen. Furutaka edged into her wake to cover the flagship. Every American cruiser shifted aim. Shells pounded Furutaka, destroyed turret 3, and ignited torpedo racks amid. Buchanan launched 5 torpedoes. One found Furutaka's forward engine room, metal shrieking, steam venting, and the cruiser beginning to lose power and flood. Kinugasa fired a torpedo spread that passed just under Boise's bow, missing by yards. Boise and Salt Lake City activated searchlights to track the retreating enemy, inadvertently guiding Kinugasa's gunners. 4 minutes later, 2 8-inch shells slammed into Boise's forward handling room. Flames erupted skyward. Nearly 100 sailors vanished in an instant, and steel plating peeled back like paper. Seawater poured through the torn hull, extinguishing the fire before it reached the powder magazines. Boise veered out of formation, retreating northward with turrets still smoking. Kinugasa exchanged fire with Salt Lake City. Several American rounds ricocheted harmlessly, but one penetrated Kinagasa's upper works. The Japanese cruiser answered with a salvo that ruptured a Salt Lake City boiler, forcing her to reduce speed. Friendly fire continued to take its toll. More shells peppered Fahrenheit, splinters destroyed antennas and splinter shields, and fragments strewed her decks. Yet she remained afloat, sliding behind Makala and Laffy to safety. Duncan, still circling helplessly, burned unchecked. Kinugasa and Hatsuki broke to port, choosing flight over prolonged battle. Scott ordered a course change, attempting to maintain contact, but a rain squall swallowed the fleeing ships. The U.S. column wheeled northwest as gunnery officers lost their targets. Firing slackened, then stopped altogether. Minutes later, Scott turned southwest to regroup. The brief pursuit cost Boise a shattered bow and Salt Lake City a crippled boiler. Japanese losses were heavier. Furutaka gutted and wallowing, Fubuki gone, Ioba scarred and smoking, and Goto mortally wounded. Yet Kinagasa's final blows had equalized the engagement, enough to allow the bombardment group to escape. As dawn approached on October 13th, the battered remnants of both fleets moved to recover what they could. Jojima's reinforcement convoy, having completed its unloading at Guadalcanal, slipped away undetected. Avoiding the American warships, the Japanese transports took a southerly route past the Russell Islands and New Georgia and began the journey home. Though Aoba had sustained heavy damage, she escaped northward through the slot alongside Furutaka wasn't as fortunate. Powerless from battle damage, she lost all systems and slipped beneath the waves. Destroyer Hatsuki recovered survivors and joined the northern retreat. On the American side, Duncan, still burning out of control, was abandoned by her crew. Admiral Scott, unaware of her fate, detached Makala to search for her and began withdrawing with his remaining ships. 1 hour later, Makala located Duncan. Her crew attempted to salvage the ship while retrieving survivors from the surrounding water, assisted by small boats from Guadalcanal, but the effort proved futile as bulkheads collapsed and flooding increased. Duncan sank just before noon, 6 miles north of Savo Island. Of her crew, 195 survived. 48 were lost to the sea. As American rescuers combed the waters for Duncan's survivors, they stumbled upon more than 100 Japanese sailors from Fubuki drifting nearby. At first, the Japanese refused all aid, clinging to their code of honor and the belief that their navy would return. No help came. 3 were taken aboard by force for interrogation and still convinced rescue was imminent. But by the next day, the truth had set in, isolated, exhausted, and abandoned. Most of the survivors finally gave in and allowed themselves to be rescued and captured. As the sun rose on October 13th, the night's toll became clear. 2 major warships gone, hundreds of sailors lost, and survivors from both sides.